Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, said quite a few years ago, something like 99.5% of basketball fans will never make it into an arena. And it's fascinating to think about how those people can participate in the sport. 50% of Gen Z have never been to a sporting event, yet 60% of Gen Z sports fans say that their fandom has increased in the last 3 years.
I can see a world where real fans trace. That's what they do. That's what we do. You know, we do that every time we consume.
You don't just sell them, you make a game out of how you get access into them. And that's where this idea of commerce and play really kind of came together.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit Innovation Podcast, the show exclusively for the people shaping the future of sport. I first appeared on this podcast as a guest, and now I'm delighted to be returning to host my own show. Over this first 5-part series, I'll be diving in deeper with various innovators and discussing industry-shaping ideas to get you thinking. On this episode of the Sports Pundit Innovation Podcast, I'm joined by Tareq Nazlawy, founder and CEO of Trace, a new product focused on recognizing the 99% of fans who aren't at the game. Tarek brings a rare blend of strategic, digital, and creative expertise to the world of sport. From his early days at BCG to leading global digital innovation at Adidas, including its groundbreaking entry into Web3, Tarek has always been at the forefront of fan experience design. Now at Trace, he's building a new way for fans to collect and own moments that matter most, digitally. Whether you're in the stands or halfway across the world, Trace captures the emotional electricity of live sport, transforming it into verified digital memorabilia for fans to collect, share, and build identity around. In this conversation, we'll unpack Tarek's journey, the future of fandom, how the technology can deepen these fan connections, and why sports organizations need to start seeing their global audience as active participants, not just spectators. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Tarek. Tarek, good evening and good morning from my time zone. How are you?
Very well. And thank you so much for having me. Very excited for what you've got going here with this chapter of the podcast.
Absolutely. This is episode 2 for me, and special to have yourself because we actually go quite a long way back. To kick us off today, we always like to start with you, your journey, how you got here. So from, you've got an amazing career from BCG to a lot of time at Addy, some amazing work there, to Science Magic Studio where we actually met. But yeah, can you walk us through, your path from consulting to digital innovation to Web3 to being a founder today?
I'll try and do that succinctly and in as compelling a fashion as I can. Well, look, as your listeners will probably be able to tell, I'm from the UK. My sort of background is that I was an engineer by training, very interested in how products were made and how businesses formed around products and propositions. So that's what I studied. And I joined BCG out of university because I love the idea of having the insights which could change the course of a company or even the course of an industry. And love that. Consulting is a special thing. It's not for everybody, but I really did dug it. I did very well there as well. But after 3 years of all head and charts and numbers and all of that kind of stuff, I really wanted to be able to sort of put my hands on what it was that I was doing. And so I went from BCG to Adidas. And my mission, if you like, I didn't know this at the time, obviously, but my mission really was really about how does the sporting goods industry make more of what people want and less of what people don't want? So, less waste, more value, very much an engineer's brain to it. I came at it from the manufacturing and supply chain and planning side of things. How do we make sure that we're not sort of making products people aren't going to buy, compressing lead times in manufacturing and putting inventory in the right places and being super clever. And I realized after a while that if you really want to impact how a product is created and how demand for that product can be properly understood, you need to touch how the product is actually made. So I took a left turn and I went into leading the customization business, which was the only place where consumers were telling the brand what it really wanted. And that's when things got really interesting because we started to look at models where a brand with centralized infrastructure in developing products and manufacturing and distribution products could potentially put that capability in service of outside creators and communities. The idea that a brand could support a network, not just have a pipeline pushing product into the market. And actually, this was the sort of days when innovation was really quite heavily funded, I'd say, at the brand. And I got the license to experiment with that properly and look at how the creator network would be able to use the brand's infrastructure. And that led me to lead digital innovation globally at the brand, looking at how technologies like NFC tags and products could be linking physical products with digital experiences.
Mm.
And eventually, of course, the emerging technology side of things, which is what led me to lead the Web3 strategy at the brand in 2021 and 2022, which was very much my red pill moment when you start to realize, how digital
Mm.
assets really potential to reframe engagement between brands and consumers or sports teams and fans. I'm sure we'll come to. And actually, on the side of that, I was building the fashion e-commerce business. That was my actual job as well, and figuring out how commerce and gamification really fit together. Which when you've got Yeezys and Adidas Balenciagas and whatever, things in scarce supply, you don't just sell them; you make a game out of how you get access into them, and that's where this idea of commerce and play really kind of came together with me alongside the Web3 side of things. So I got headhunted to go join Science Magic Studios, which is a Web3 studio,
Mhm.
which the whole idea back in 22 was how would brands and rights holders and entertainment franchises be using this kind of technology to connect with community and potentially even unlock and share more value in the network. And that's when we started engaging with people like yourself, Leanne, on the side of sports teams and brands. And the same brief just came up over and over again, which was we really would love to know who our fans and
Mm.
there's money in that as well, if we can figure that out, right? Like we can only monetize directly fans that we know. And all our sponsors are really increasing, let's say, the pressure on us to understand who that fan base is, because when they put sponsorship money into our sport, they want to understand what the impact of that is one way or another. So we ended up knocking up a couple of sort of prototypes on how that could work. And that's really what gave way to Trace. We did a proof of concept for F1 fans. Needless to say, the response to that was really good. So we just decided to spin that out. And I made the choice about, am I going to be a founder for the first time at the age of 40? The answer was yes. At the end of the day, this was a product we wanted to exist for ourselves, as well as seeing the business impact. And when you come at something with that kind of conviction, you start to make the stupid decisions about what you're willing to put at stake to bring that to life. And that was about 18 months ago or so now. So here we are.
Awesome. You're an innovator, right? You've showed that through your career. So it's unsurprising that when you get the chance to become a founder, which we've discussed at length, is a bit like standing on the edge of the abyss chewing glass, is not an easy one, but it's unsurprising that you took it. Now, you're right, we are going to go into Trace, but before we get there, I'd love to dig into the insights, the things that you found when working with the sports industry. You took Adidas into the metaverse, all the kind of journey through Web3, the power of community, connecting internet strangers, things like that. I would love to spend some time there and sort of pick apart your insights and lessons from that obviously led to Trace, which we'll get to soon. If we could spend some time there and sort of understand your insights and what you learned from that time.
Yeah, I mean, from the Adidas time, I think the takeaways were I had to piece things together, let's say, and things always make sense in retrospect more than they do at the time. It always sounds smarter when you
Mm.
recount the story. But for me, the thing I learned from Adidas was that play is taking over the world, right? So whether you are trying to sell a product or you're trying to engage a consumer or anything to do with hearts and minds, really, everything needs to be looked at through the lens of entertainment because it's not now enough just to have a great product. It's almost not enough just to have a great brand either. The idea of encasing that product or experience in the context of entertainment is really how you start to appeal to that sort of younger parts of ourselves that enjoy the idea that there's more meaning in how myself and others interact with this product and experience. And so to make that less abstract, at the time it was about creating sneakers and it was about getting hold of scarce sneakers, right? So, for example, if there's only 1,000 pairs of something, but there's 50,000 people that want it, like, what's the game? Like, do you find
Mm.
out about what's dropping and how do you earn access to it? And that kind of behavior, by the way, I mean, you also were seeing the parallels in the Web3 space at the time in the whole NFT community, right?
Mm.
The idea of being part of a subculture and the idea that there's this cultural meaning associated with this product that not everybody gets, but this subgroup does get. And those behaviors I thought were very interesting because it starts to teach you about how do you build experiences in a way where actually the delivery for your product is really entertainment, right? So I'd
Mm.
say
Mm.
that was, let's call it like the learning from the Science Magic Studios time. When you get the same kind of question three times in a row and it slaps you in the
Mm.
face, which is, we don't know who our fans are, and that's starting to become a problem for us. And then you create a prototype which borrows from this idea of entertainment and collectability and the idea of like there's time limited windows to participate in something, but like I want to be part of this thing because it's something that I feel is part of my identity from the fan side of
Hmm.
things. That if you can crack something which feels compelling from a fan perspective, right? The game of I'm here every week, or I'm here every race or every match. And by being here and by being counted, I get access to things and I become connected with all those other people all over the world who share that with me. That if you can solve a business problem with that, which is anonymity, right, then there's value in piecing those things together. My sort of brainwaves, my sort of penny drop moments are always when you see maybe this is the engineer in me kind of coming through, which
Mm,
is you've got multiple actors in an ecosystem and value is trapped because if we don't know who fans are, then as a sports team or a sports league, I have limitations in how I can directly monetize them. And from a brand side of things, if I can understand more about who those fans are, I can start to understand how to be smarter with my investment or possibly even acquire direct relationships with those fans. And when you piece that all together, you're like, oh, there's some common threads in here. And
mm,
maybe there's a role for the technology to play in actually unlocking value for all three parties by thinking less about the sort of siloed deals of, sticking your logo on the jersey and then creating eyeballs and considerations, but by creating a game which people can actively participate in and
mm,
actively look into, and that creates connective tissue. So, you know, I'd love to say that it was like a brainwave, or, some people sometimes ask you, like, how did you get the idea? And the answer
mm.
is, it only makes sense when you look back.
Yeah. And it sounds like what you're sort of saying to me is like fan engagement is not passive. That is the key takeout here. It's not a passive thing to engage a fan. And I know that you've talked to me before about moving from transactional to emotional, going that layer deeper and talking about participatory fandom. Is this really what you're talking about here? It's going beyond just sitting there at a screen and slapping logos on and seeing something.
I think, any true fan would probably never say that the act of being a fan is passive. Like, for me, it's Formula One, right? As you know. And that means that every race weekend, I have the negotiation about the fact that, like, I want to watch qualifying and a race, and it's in the middle of a Sunday when the kids have got parties and all of that. So there is a genuine commitment, sometimes even a sacrifice to be a fan, even if you're never at the game. So it never feels passive, right? But at the same
Yep.
time, like, there's an intermediation between you and the sport because really it's entertainment coming through a screen and it's kind of washing over you. And you're watching it, you might be active, but you're not active with the rights holder and you're not active with any of the brands. Active in your WhatsApp channel or in your fantasy league or commenting on YouTube. And all of that engagement is fragmented. So I'd say that, like, while the act of being a fan is definitely a real commitment, right? A true, for a true fan, so people who are obsessed with the sport, there's no connective tissue that actually means that all of those acts are actually recognized. Instead of it being, I passively consume, I see that, yes, Louis Vuitton is now a sponsor of Formula One and it's probably sinking into my brain somewhere. But if I'm
Mhm.
actually as active in my participation in my fandom in a way which can be read and understood and accumulated, then there's a connective tissue there, which is like just getting me to do that one thing, sitting from the couch or from my kid's swimming lesson, wherever it is that I'm watching. And that creates that kind of connective tissue. So the emotion is already there. There's just not been a carrier for it in a way which can unlock value between those three parties
That's right.
because it's so fragmented across the digital ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we're seeing from fandom that, the trends and the kind of signals are that it's not enough just to be passive or deliver passively anymore, especially from your at home audience. Just watching is becoming less and less interesting. We're certainly seeing from these younger fan bases, they won't even sit through a 90-minute match or, a full thing. And if they
Yeah.
are, they're absolutely on your second screen doing, other things on social or however it might be.
I mean, there's great stats on that, by the way. I
Yeah.
mean, 50% of Gen Z have never been to a sporting event.
Yes.
Yet
Yeah.
60% of Gen Z sports fans say that their fandom has increased in the last 3 years.
That's right.
70% in screening during a sporting event as well. And 30% self-declare as super fans. So, like, you just have to look. Some people talk about the lost generation of sports fans, because they're not sitting down and watching the match or they're not coming to the game, but they're there. They're just not consuming in convenient ways anymore for the traditional organizations like a rights holder or a sponsor or a broadcaster to be able to fully capture, because these things are all sort of quite linear distribution models, and culture happens in networks, right? So we need to start to understand that the distribution model, the capture of culture, has up with the way that sport's consumed.
The fandom has changed and so must the metrics. How much we measure value and what we think is valuable now must move with the times also. You can't measure it by viewership on linear broadcast because it's just not a behavior that happens anymore.
Yeah.
Now that brings us really though to, this 99%, which I know that you're passionate about, and arguably what traditional sport was probably never actually designed to capture. It wasn't really ever about the 99%. It was always about the people that hit the stadium. And when we should preface, when we talk about the 99%, that's because roughly that's how many fans that will never make it in real life, and that's going to become more common. Look at these stats you just showed us with Gen Z. We're going to see that more and more and more. Less in stadium, more viewing online, streaming. My first episode was with Lucy from the XR Sports Alliance. You can imagine in not too many years how good that home product is going to be. It's going to feel even better than if you were there without all the hassle, all the convenience, all the fun. And this really brings us on to where you're living today. So this recognizing 99%. So the philosophy really behind Trace, and I think what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, Tell us about Trace. Tell us about your mission really to recognize this 99%, if you will.
Yeah. So the insight that you're absolutely right about, I think it was Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, who first said, I think even quite a few years ago, something like, I think he even said 99.5% of basketball fans will never make it into an arena.
Mm,
And it's fascinating to think about how those people can participate in the sport, which I didn't even know about until we had until we'd actually arrived at the same conclusion from a different place, which is through some of the clients that we've been working with at SMS and through interviews. And the numbers bear themselves out, which is that
mm,
sports rights holders in particular like to quote the number of fans they have globally by adding up their social media following, right? And saying, we have got a bajillion fans or whatever. But it might be 100 million or hundreds of million of fans. The number of known fans, right? Let's call them like email addresses or accounts, varies anywhere between about 0.25 or 1.5% of that number. So it's actually 1% of what you're claiming to be your global fan base you actually know. So
mm,
whether it is Adam Silver's version or just do the math version, the 1% piece is real. And there was some quite public sort of airings of things like that around, for example, like Spotify's deal with Barcelona, right? Where they were, looking
yeah.
at activating the Barcelona fans. And it turns out that they could only activate roughly 1% of the quoted number of fans, which for a digital first company is just nuts. The 99% piece, I gave the example of myself. I've not missed a race in 6 years, but I've only ever been to one F1 race,
Mm,
right? And in the
mhm,
case of F1, because it's one of those sort of global circus sports, like even if you are obsessed, you're not going to them all, right? Like you'll be lucky to go to the one in your country if one happens in your country. The same is true of tennis, and also of golf. So most sport is now consumed remotely. And actually, the media business has done a fantastic job of cultivating access and passion for those sports.
mm,
But now the question is, well, how do you not have a dead end in that experience? And how do those fans get recognized for all those arguments they're having with their husbands and wives at the weekend? Or even better, like, the little tribe on the couch all, watching it together or going to the pub together and things like that. And sport exists for them, because of them. And so our view is that, like, from a fan perspective is, well, I want something to show for that. I want something to show for the fact that I was there, whether I'm able to make it or not. I don't feel
mm.
like I care less than somebody who's at
No.
Wimbledon, at Silverstone, or able to go to the Emirates Stadium, whatever. I don't care less because I can't be there, right? I care just as much. And in fact, like, I want the recognition for that and I want better access to the sport. And I did, like, it would be even better if I could be, recognized and rewarded for that. You don't claim all of the 99% are just sitting there ready, right? But like, if you can go from 1% to 10% of your fan base
Mm,
being known, that's 10x. And you know what? Even at $10 to $15 of annual revenue per fan, let's say, that's some really meaningful numbers for most sports rights holders, for sure. And from a sponsorship perspective, understanding who is obsessed with the sport and what are they into and what makes them different and when are they engaging and how are they engaging before and during and after the game, understanding that kind of information is extremely precious to marketers. So the 99% deserve the recognition, or as many of them as are super fans as possible. So take that 30% number from
Mm.
the report. So it's not all 99% of them. It's valuable for them to get the recognition. It's valuable for everybody to understand who they are. Now, the contradiction is
Yes.
we're for all fans, that 100%, right? At the end of the day. So if you are also in the stadium, if you are also able to go to these events, that's an act of fandom, which of course is worthy of recognition and even elevated recognition. And
Mm.
actually, a lot of rights holders are also heavily focused on how to make that in stadium experience as life changing as possible, and of course to monetize as well as possible. And so part of the benefit of engaging the 99 is that if we can create a connection with those people such that they become one of those people that comes to the stadium, then they can have the religious experience in church
Mhm. Mhm.
at the event, which only drives lifetime value up, not just on the day, but for every season thereafter as well. So we're for all fans, but like we just think the missing piece is, how do you have a routine way to acquire and engage those fans who are just as obsessed as I am and my team is, and most fans who never get to go to games really are. So that's why we're focused on them. At the end of the day, we think that that's probably in the end where the long term value of these IPs is going to come from. It's going to come from knowing who those fans are and being able to directly activate and monetize them.
And you raise a good point, right? This is actually about recognizing the 100%. And actually, if we look after that majority, which will sit outside your stadium, you can actually, for the first time, recognize all 100 or engage all 100%.
It might even relate to your last podcast as well, right? In
Mm,
fact,
mm.
I recently was pitching a football team and I just thought, what should be the opening gambit for a team? And I decided to phrase it as you don't even know the true size of your stadium, right? I mean, your stadium's got 40,000 seats in it. What's the true size of it, right? If we lived in a world where ethereally we could all sit there like spiritually, right, which is
Mm,
happening every
mm,
match, how many
mm,
seats would that? What's the true
mm.
size? And how do you a stadium's got its limitations, right? And you know this from your time also at the All Blacks, like games aren't even on all the time, right? So
No,
what's happening outside the stadium to make those people not feel like that they're sitting inside the stadium, but to recognize that they have a seat, a mental model, which I think is maybe one of the best visual ways to sort of picture it. It could be 10 times bigger.
I agree. And I think that's true for across the board, right? No matter how big, you can talk about the big sort of 6 or 10 clubs in the world. Again, their growth is not going to come from fitting more people in the stadium. Some of them are building bigger stadiums, but that will always have a ceiling. What doesn't and what is scalable beyond any limit really is this digital fan base, these people who are ethereally sitting here engaging. And we know that technology is coming. Before we move on to Tracer, we are coming to that point, but do you believe the sports and I mean, I think I know which side I sit on. The sports industry really still prioritizes this effectively this 1%, not the majority. Why is that? Why is the in venue experience still prioritized over this digital fan base when we know the value really sits outside? Yeah. Why do you think the sports industry is like this?
I can only tell you from my perspective because I'm not somebody who would decide to prioritize that, but I don't critique the decision to do that very heavily, quite
Hmm.
frankly.
Hmm.
And here's a couple of reasons, I think. The first one is that that's what gets shown on TV, right? For example, the pitch itself, the fans, all of the signage around the stadium, all of the sponsorship inventory, which is there to have brands in front of all of the eyeballs,
Hmm. Hmm.
is stadium, right? Iconic things, whether it's a football stadium or take, for example, Roland Garros, right now on the tennis side
Yeah.
of things, it's an iconic location, right? And so the association that comes with the iconic location is sacred. And I think it does deserve that level of attention. I think the other thing is that if you think about the value per fan, right, the ones that come through the stadium in one day between tickets and concessions and possibly merchandise could spend 10 times more than a remote fan would in a year, right? So, from a money perspective, there's going to be a clear argument for that as well. I think some of it's probably just down to more like the idea that this is our church. This is where the most unadulterated religious experience of the sport and of the team and its heritage, it happens here. So like that's why you build your church, right?
Hmm.
So I think there's lots of reasons why, and there's lots of advancements going on in stadium technology, engagement, connectivity, screening, and things like that. Even to the extent of like, you know, if this is being televised in China, maybe it looks like it's a different sponsor on the board than it does if it's
Yeah,
in the US, and we're multiplying our inventory that way. I think all of that stuff is fantastic. It's just not the whole pie.
that's right.
So it's well understood. Like if when you think about anything innovation wise, optimizing and doing a slightly better job of the things that we know is always going to be easier than trying to figure out how to tackle those things that maybe we just don't know as well, right? And as much as these sports franchises often would declare themselves as global entertainment brands, right? Actually, being an entertainment brand means basically being a media company, right? It
Hmm.
means being able to connect with your fans, activate them, understand them, and move them, shall we say? But actually, for most sports teams, like they're still trying to figure out how to make sure you get in the Champions League or how you get enough bums in seats and how you make sure that your merchandise sells out and the rest of that stuff. So I think that there's a bit of like also like what are the capabilities that sit inside the organization today? And
Hmm.
if there was a number to say, well, if we go from 1% to 10%, then it's worth this much money. I don't think that's
Hmm.
fully understood compared to
Yeah.
if we actually run a few more matches in a season and we fill up the stadium, we know exactly what that's worth, right? I think it's, I try not to be too judgmental about it because in general, I think in sports, people follow the money and the most measurable revenue streams are the ones which always will get the most attention.
No, for sure. And I think you're right. It is church. That is the most sacred experience you can possibly ever have. It's just the most pure you may get. I think absolutely technologies will wear down that wall between the two. And that coupled with the change in fandom, the behaviors we're already seeing, but also their kind of indifference to whether they're really there or really not.
Mm.
But I think, you raised two good things. It's not the whole pie. And the growth that I think we can see is that bigger majority part of the pie that is sort of yet to be tackled well. And that routine, which I like that word, to kind of unlock it, right? Because we know, again, with fandom, rituals, routine, these are all part of the church experience, right? So
Yeah.
that really does sort of bring us, I think, then to Trace. I'd love for you to dig in then. Tell us how it works. Tell us who is it for. Tell us from a fan's perspective and a rights holder's perspective, what does it do?
So I'll start with who it's for. First and foremost, it's for the fan, right? And so what Trace is about is making every single sporting live event into a collectible credential, right? So if we had had this for the last 6 years, for example, I would have some kind of proof of my commitment to the sport because of my ritual engagement, right? Every single race weekend. And that would effectively be like my fan passport, right? That has got all my stamps in it, which then unlocks the best of the sport for me. And that doesn't just mean from, in my case, Formula One, it might be tennis, it might be golf, it might be martial arts, whatever it is. It's also from the partners of the sport as well. Right. At the end of the day, I will happily make myself known and say, I collect this, you know who I am, if now I also get access to recognition and rewards from the rights holder and from the sponsors. Right. So
Mm,
that's why I want it. I want it because it's my credential, it's my proof that I've been there the whole time. No matter whether it was a good season or a great race or a rubbish race, true fans are there no matter what. Right.
yep.
And it happens to be that sometimes it really matters, right? These are like moments in history, right? That's the first slide of our deck is were you there when it mattered? And we've got all the pictures of, Tiger Woods in 2019 or England in the rugby or
Yep.
England women's in the football in the Euro finals. And the fact of the matter is that like sometimes we're there when it matters, but true fans are there no matter what anyway. And that's what we think deserves recognition. So what we do with Trace, right, is it's basically you make every live moment collectible. We
Mhm.
take data from that event and we give a fan a window to say, if you are here between this time and this time, come and collect this thing. It's like your virtual ticket stub. And then after the event, we take the data from the event and all the participation, all of the fans. And we're actually looking at now using AI as well to bring more sort of fan sentiment into the collectible, fuse it all together as like a way to mark this moment. What happened? What was the story? Who was here? Right. Usually we do it before the start of an event, right? So lights out in a Formula One race when all the cars sort of go off the grid. That's the close of the window, right? Just like you can't get tickets for an event after the event's happened, you can't collect a trace after the event's happened. If you were there, you were there. If you weren't there, you weren't there, right? And each of these ones, of course, is like digitally unique. That's why we use the blockchain technology. So each one could be, differentiated one from another. So you can have number one of 65,000 or number 40 or etc. But we use these as like a currency within a game, right? And the game is collect to unlock. And then we layer on other things into that. For example, if you make a prediction correctly, then your collectible is different in the end. If you collect together as a group, right, like as a family or as a crew or whatever, then actually there's an identifier to show that this is a sub community within the wider community, right? If you bring
Mhm.
in leveled up for that. One thing we're looking at right now is what if I'm wearing the jersey during the game, right? Is there a way that I can actually get recognized for the fact I'm not just here paying attention, I'm wearing the
Mhm.
team's cup and I'm rooting like right now for that team and I can prove it. All of these acts of fandom are things that we want to be able to capture and credit in this series of collectibles, which add up to your credit in your passport. And your passport is what ultimately unlocks rewards, rewards from rights holder and from brand sponsor, whether that is the paddock pass tickets for the end of the season, or whether it's the fan
Mhm.
Q&A with the athletes, or whether it's also doing some smart things with digital collectibles themselves and using those as rewards so that, because we have provable scarcity, we can take a specific moment or a championship point from a game and make that something which we give to a fan in recognition from they've collected all the races this season or what have you.
Mhm.
So it's basically a little flywheel. It's just a playability flywheel of collect, play, unlock. But while it looks just like a sort of another thing I would do alongside my fantasy, the whole idea of it is that underneath that, I've got my fan passport, which is
Mhm.
accumulating across all the races, matches across the seasons in a way which gives me that proof. And it allows me to be seen by the organizations I want to be seen by because I want better access to the sport. And that's what's in it for the rights holders, right? Is fan collects, they get to know who they are, right? And from a brand perspective, the idea of knowing what the behavior is of a fan across the season, or even being able to directly acquire that fan because they've opted into something which is sponsored by an Adidas or sponsored by a Stella Artois or whatever it might be. Now, they're not just putting sponsorship money in for eyeballs, they're actually having active engagement and acquiring that fan directly. You have to
Mhm.
package it something which means something. And I was there when it mattered and I can prove it is the underlying sort of motivation that we're tapping into.
I mean, I went to music concerts all through my youth, and one in particular was a concert called Big Day Out, and it had a really nice, like, designed ticket. And every year I wanted that ticket, whether I went there or not, I still wanted it. And I had them on my wall for many, many years. And I think this is almost that. This is how you stylistically go. I was there at that moment. Here's the proof of this. And I think you raise a really good point around emotionally, it's no different. If I was there in person or if I was not, I still felt it. As a fan, I can think of definitely occasions in sport where I've been there in the stadium, but also just watching on TV with my family. They're just as special. They're just as, locked in or seared into the brain. So this is a way to recognize that. And then that gives that long tail, right? Because I can see this being interesting for obviously those you're activating with, the rights holders and their brand partners, but also anyone on the fringe. If effectively what you're doing is making the intangible tangible, right? Something that existed, but it's like a tree fell in the wood, but doesn't make noise if anyone's not there to hear it. You're making sure that that's captured. And that allows then for that long tail. So you could look back on a Formula One event and say, let's say this was the one in Australia, and I'm a brand that's in Melbourne and I would actually like to activate all those people that went through that ritual and went through that routine.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
who have you been working with? How has it been landing? What can you tell us around the partners that you work with and the ventures that you've gone into already? Because there's been a few.
So the very first thing I mentioned before was the proof of concept we knocked up for Formula One fans just to test it out. And at that point, we were really experimenting. But we found that with basically nil marketing, we had nearly 20,000 people collect these things across the four races that we did it for. And what stuck out to that was the repeat engagement, right? Was the number of people coming back to collect more and asking, are we going to do more next season? And
Mm.
so we understood at that point that there was a fan behavior. And then the next thing to do was to basically be like, okay, well, why don't we just try and sort of put our foot to the floor and see if this scales with the rights holder? And so the job was to figure out, could we find one rights holder who has the same problem that we've been discussing and
Mhm.
is willing to try this out, to experiment it? And that was the ATP Tour. And the ATP Tour, they have a really strong team, and they've got some clear goals around this. They've got a great champion on their side as well, a guy called Mark
Mm.
Epps,
Mhm.
who's been experimenting with emerging technology before. So they were kind of in that ideal customer profile for us, right? People who have this problem, they have a global fan base, they don't really know them, but they have the will to go and experiment. And we teamed up to try out Trace at the ATP finals in Turin.
Mm.
For anybody who's not aware of the tennis side of things, the ATP finals is the last kind of big competition of the tennis season. After the ATP Masters 1000s and all the Grand Slams, at the end, the top 8 players in the world by the ATP rankings, men's tennis this is, compete
Mhm.
against each other for the finals trophy. So there's not a bad match of tennis basically in that tournament. And it was really straightforward. We basically said, all right, well, let's use some match data to generate basically pieces of artworks that would be derived from actually what happened on the court. We used some data called momentum data to sort of capture the swings of like who's got the momentum between an Alcaraz and Sinner and what have you. And we would market that through ATP's channels and see what happened. And in 8 days, 75,000 people became users, and one third of them collected every single match, right? And the average number of matches collected was 10 out of 15. Now, that smashed our expectations based on the Formula One thing, right? We thought the results were good there. And, when you sort of benchmark this against other digital activations and fan engagement things, it was multiples more effective. And
Mm.
the ATP its fan database by 25% or so in 8 days. And that really got some attention. And it was a fantastic relief for us, obviously, as well, to be
It's
able to.
yeah, and not 10x. It's like a whole lot, well, a whole lot more, right? You get 25% growth out of a fan base.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in 8 days. And there's a lot more to come, because of course, like you learn how to communicate it and how to optimize the experience and the rest of that. And so off the back of that success, it's become a lot easier to obviously convey the value now. It's just like,
Mm.
oh,
Mm.
okay. So like something which is even as simple as we didn't even promise a fan anything, right? Now you link the rewards to that, that's more gas on the fire. People start to understand that, like, well, I would like to do that for my sports IP too, or I would love to do that with my sponsorship. And the best evidence of that, of course, is when somebody says, I like that, I want more. And so with the ATP Tour now, we'll be doing the Trace program for all of the Masters 1000 series in men's tennis, starting in July this year and through 2026. Well, so instead of it being like a one event thing, it's going to now become exactly what we hoped for, which is capturing the ritual of the season and basically connecting that narrative and the fans who are participating in that narrative. One program where all of those credentials will land on a tennis ID, right?
Mhm.
And actually, the
Mhm.
ATP Tour is connect that with its launch of its own single sign-on as well. Like that's how compelling the results have been.
Amazing.
Is that now got something to put on the other side of having a tennis ID account, and mark all of those engagements, and that idea of identity really kind of comes to the fore at that point. So that's been a really good success to start off with, and we're looking forward to doing some more. And of course, we're in many more conversations now about how this applies elsewhere in motorsport and in golf and elsewhere in tennis as well. So yeah, very good start.
I have to say I was one of the 75,000. I didn't get near 10, I don't think. I'm gonna blame that on my time zone. But yeah, I've collected a few, and I've also have some of my F1 editions as well. And I think, what's really interesting from a fan point of view is these stylistically look really cool, right? So there's that real collector inside you that wants to actually stamp these moments. It's like
Yeah.
Pokemon for adult sports fans. There we go.
It kind of is. I mean, we sort of break it down to like when people say, "Why does a fan do this?" Right? And there's not
Mm,
one
mm,
answer. There's three. There's three answers. The first is I already give a so I'm already here doing it, and now now there's something that I can collect in order to demonstrate that, and the compulsion to do that is really strong. Right. The second one that builds on that is the idea of being recognized officially by the thing that I'm a fan of, the team or the
mhm.
league, or possibly even an athlete, also means that this is kind of like blessed. This means that like it's okay, it's not just me and other
Indoors.
fans. It's actually that like it's endorsed. Exactly. It's endorsed. And on the other side of this now, then these guys have the capacity to actually open
Mm,
access to the sport for the most engaged. So there's that feeling
mm,
of like, the recognition piece. And then the final one is the rewards, right? And we debate all the time about how important the rewards really are. Like, because at the end of the
mm,
day, like a lot of rewards, they don't scale. Some do scale and some don't. VIP tickets to games and all that kind of stuff is what you see everywhere. But like most people don't get those. So it has to be compelling enough to play and to be part of, especially this whole idea of multiplayer, right? The idea that it's not just me in the sport, it's me and all the other fans, us, we are here all around the world. It has to be compelling enough to do that. And I think even without the rules component, the results have been so strong that we think there's a genuine, underlying behavior to tap into. Our ambition is to be that ID for a fan, no matter which sport it is that they're into. So it's almost like I've got my keychain with all my keys on it because I've been
yeah.
collecting them through, I also like football and I like motorsport and I like golf. And now I've got all of that in a place where that ID can now be recognized anywhere on the internet.
But instead of that sort of fragmented experience of having to be here, here, and here, just because you like motorsport and football.
I think the beauty of a solution here would be to respect that it's going to happen on loads of different touch points and not to try
Yes.
and fix that. Like the idea that I'm going to consume it here instead of here
Yeah.
is never going to
Mhm,
happen, right?
mhm,
Like, yes, I watch a ton of YouTube before and after the matches. Yes, I also watch on broadcast. Yes, I also follow on social. Yes, I also do fantasy. And the problem
mhm.
is, all of that stuff isn't something which, like, I don't get any credit for any. Like, I don't get, like, nobody knows that about me,
Nobody
right?
knows. Yeah. Nobody
Nobody
knows.
like, if I've got this other thing which also collects all of that, then somehow that information is now visible in the ecosystem as much as I want it to be visible. And that means that I can now travel in the network between the sports I love and all the sponsors and potentially even, hospitality near the events if I'm going to stay in a hotel when I go visit Indian Wells in California. And in the same way that having a gold card for something is, something that you want to flex, or a membership to a Soho house or whatever. The idea here is instead of it being a membership that I pay for by my
Yeah.
actions, by my engagement, by my commitment, and by making that recognizable, there's people who've got relevant things for you, right? Even just think about down. Somebody was saying the other day, was it you? It's like maybe it was you. I should probably credit you this for this one. But like, you know, there is a ritual every weekend, right? Like
Mm.
all right, it's Formula One, or it's Super Bowl Sunday, or it's college football on a Monday night. And, we order in, we get some wings, we get some drinks and whatever. There's way more than just watching the sport. And
Exactly.
anything which helps me to live that ritual better or cooler or indulge myself more as part of my self care routine for me and my other family or friends, that's very powerful. And we think that there should be an identifier for that. And that's what Trace is about.
I totally agree. I see the fan behavior. This is what excites me about it. There's a match to what fans are signaling they want. I think you've proven it now twice, once without, very organically, without the kind of marketing push behind it. And then look what happens when you can, get that kind of groundswell with the marketing push to go a little deeper into what you've encountered from sports. What is sort of hesitations then? What this seems to be on to something. I feel like there is something here. Unlocking this 99%, it has been very, very hard thus far. So what are some of your biggest hesitations, misconceptions that you're encountering? Because I'm
Um,
assuming it's not all roses.
no, of course. I mean, what I'm describing isn't rocket science, but it's still hard to do. Probably two main things. One we alluded to before, which is, as in any organization, the organizations are usually aligned around core set of practices, objectives, like where it's really genuinely organized around, a few things. And with sports teams, it's highly, highly commercial, right? Like
Of course.
what kind of revenue can we bring in because we got to pay for all of the athletes and the facilities and all of that kind of stuff, especially with bigger sports IPs. The mindset of, will I invest to unlock value with this group, or will you pay me to help me have the privilege of understanding who my fans are, is one. And that's not universally true, but if you wanted to paint with a broad brushstroke, that's kind of how sports have been working. I mean, Formula One is a fantastic example of that, right? When,
Mhm,
be our technology partner, you've got to be on the car, right? Like that's it.
mhm,
And that's
mhm,
going to cost
mhm,
you 50 million a year for the
mhm,
doing so. I think on the marketing side of these sports organizations, there's genuinely a growing tailwind on direct to fan relationships and fan engagement.
mhm.
But often on the commercial side of the organization, there's sometimes like, okay, that's fantastic, but you know what? It's still a pay to play business, right?
Yeah.
So there are few who are ready to reach into their pockets to do that, right? Which is why our proposition is really around, hold up, we're not really here to pay you to elevate us, right? That's not the idea. We're here to help you make money. And in order to do that, you're going to need to grow the number of fans that you know, because whether that money is coming from sponsors or merchandise or ticketing or OTT streaming or any of the digital stuff we can do, we're still going to know who they are, right? So we focus on, how does a program like this add digital inventory that you can commercialize with your sponsor, right? So
Mhm.
don't ask me for the money. Let's go make money together by giving the brand sponsors what they want, which is attribution, attribution,
Yeah.
attribution, attribution. They all want to know. 80% of brand sponsors are under pressure to demonstrate what's the ROI on this, right? Or a solution to that problem. And that's a bit of a mindset shift, right? Which is why we're also working directly with some brands as well on how to activate the rights that they already have, right? So that's one, I think. And I think the second one is that fan engagement as a category it's pretty broad, and there have been some things which work well, and there are some things which haven't worked well at all, especially when you look at the blockchain and Web3 components to it. There's a bit of a trail of dead bodies on, like, yeah, I've seen the NFT thing, right? And which is why we don't really talk. It's just an
Yeah.
enabler of provable scarcity and
Yes.
verifiable credential, and that's it. So there's always, like, depending on who you're talking to, there's a certain degree of like, I think I've seen 1,000 things like this. And we're like, I don't think you have. We stand for fans who give a no matter where they are in the world. We
Yeah.
are here to you give your brand sponsors the attribution, which creates value for you in sponsorship revenue. And we are basically creating real time media, which helps to capture that cultural energy using the event data and participation data to basically capture culture in real time. It's
Mm.
that kind of reactive media is almost part of the storytelling experience as well. So we do obviously have a differentiation, but you do have to sort of pitch that and make sure that you stand out from many more basic things or things that people think they've seen before.
We're going to go into our last section, but I want to thank you. Why I wanted you on this innovation podcast is because I think this is the true definition of innovation, right? You're taking the space between and creating something net new. You're creating value where value doesn't currently exist. And I think there's something interesting around this that if you can unlock, so much will follow. So I
Mm.
think, yeah, you are a real innovator responding to the context of which we're operating in. So I think it's really interesting what you're doing. I think it's going to bring a change in view to the sports industry that's needed. Figuring out how to unlock those that never sit inside the stadium, but also the ones that do, and really come to this ritualistic, participatory fandom that people really want and is only going to increase as we get these younger generations through. Now, to finish up, because you guys are innovators that are on this show, is what comes next? What's your read? What will change? What will move? What do you see coming? If you can paint a picture for me, and it can be, as far as 5 years for generally, but also for Trace, what does it look like to you?
I think generally what I would say is that, I mean, the landscape, I'll try and do this concisely, but there's definitely a tailwind that we've been talking around about the importance of knowing the fan. You can even see it in how new leagues are emerging, right? Like every franchise, every sport vertical has got a challenger franchise in it now, whether it's from, you know, Kings League to Ultimate Tennis Showdown or Karate Combat or, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Like there's all challenger franchise everywhere. Because I think people understand that being a fan is the game, right? And sport, the heart of it is the pursuit of what's possible from a human perspective as an individual or as a team. But it's not just, we're not just sort of sitting in the Colosseum now watching and cheering the gladiators anymore. Like it is a game. And you can see it with sports betting and everything like that as well on the
Hmm.
rise. I think the way I would see it is that the fragmentation of how people consume sport will continue to increase. I
Hmm.
think some of these emerging leagues as well will eat some of the pie. And one of the benefits of the modern world we live in is that even a medium-sized franchise can have a very valuable fan base. You don't have to be, one of
Yeah.
the super majors to be able to have a very viable business. And the importance of being able to understand who that is and how that fan moves through that network of culture is going to increase as well, right? Now, whether that's we're going to be all wearing goggles and consuming it in VR, or whether it's going to be we'll still be sitting in front of a TV with different overlays and whatever, like I don't know, right? The reason
Mhm.
we're doing what we're doing is because we're not placing a bet on the mode of consumption at all.
Correct.
We're placing a bet on the fact that the centrality of people's fandom to their own identity is not going anywhere. Whether that key unlocks something in a stadium or on a website or in a metaverse, you still need a set of keys to do that. And that's what we want to provide. So for
Hmm.
Trace, in 5 years' time, I think there's two futures for Trace. Not at the same time, but there's two. One of them is that will be a lot of these fan ID and collectibles programs. They could be almost like white label programs run by any league or team. And that would be like just a piece of almost like middleware in the software stack, which
Hmm.
allows that fan ID to be read anywhere. And we would be very happy with that, by the way. Like that would be a fantastic outcome. And the other outcome is that maybe it turns out that the best possible articulation for what we're doing is for Trace to actually be a symbol that stands for this is for fans who give a shit and want to
Mm.
have something to show for it, and almost be, you know, intellectual property in its own. I
Mm.
have my sizey because, like, when we go direct to fan and people want to understand the audience that actually carried this ID with them. Maybe, in the end of the day, whether you go B2B to C or whether you go B2C, a lot of it depends really on like where are the headwinds and tailwinds,
Yeah.
in the right
Come next.
balance. 100 million fans with a fan ID powered by us. It's not dumb. It's not crazy. There's a lot more fans than
No,
that.
exactly. It's a small percentage of the total pie when you think about it like that. And I believe in the ethos of what you're doing. I can see a world where real fans trace. That's what they do. That's what we do. We do that every time we consume. So
I'm just going to write
with
that
that,
down. Yeah.
with that, Tarek, I want to thank you for your time today. I appreciate always what you bring to the sports industry, and what you do bring is a different view. I think pushing the boundaries is always the goal with you, and something I always appreciate. So thank you for your thoughts today. Thank you for sharing, and hope the listeners have enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. You know where to find me on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out, we'd be happy to chat about anything we've discussed. And I'll be watching all the episodes you put out, Leanne. That's for sure. We're all going to learn a lot through this.
Thanks, Tarek.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Pundit Innovation Podcast. In the show notes, you'll find more info about today's guest and the topics covered. Visit sportspundit.co to find previous editions of the podcast, access the newsletter, sign up to our WhatsApp community, and join us at an upcoming social event in cities all around the world. See you again soon.